Cześć! Zapraszam Was serdecznie na drugą część mojego wywiadu z Nickiem Simperem, czyli współzałożycielem zespołu Deep Purple, basistą, kompozytorem. Tym razem Nick opowiedział mi o dalszej części swojej kariery muzycznej tuż po tym, jak opuścił szeregi zespołu Deep Purple. Pojawią się wątki jego współpracy z Marshą Hunt, Screaming Lord Sutchem, czy jego działalność w ramach zespołu Warhorse, Fandango, Good Old Boys. Także zapraszam Was serdecznie. Przed Wami Nick Simper.
Quatermass II, which is, I don't know if you've ever heard Quatermass II.
Yeah, of course, with Don Irie, with Mick Underwood, and
Yeah, that's one of my favourites. I mean, we made that in 5 minutes, but the energy in it, I think, is just great. I just love that album. Manic playing, you know, great musos, great players. Yeah, I liked it, and sometimes the best stuff is done in 5 minutes. I mean, like Shades of Deep Purple, you know, made in 18 hours. I mean,
You know, the Quatermass, as you're talking about it, it's the second album. I mean, the first one was only, I think, Mick Underwood was in the lineup from the second.
Yeah, that was the original one. Yeah, the original Quatermass. They became sort of legendary, and the vinyl was collectible. And it was Derek Lawrence. I bumped into Mick Underwood at a record company Christmas drink. And we started chatting because we were old friends. And Derek Lawrence says, "You two should form a new band," he said, "and call it Quatermass II," because we'd all had a few drinks. We said, "Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do that." And we did. Yeah. John was great as always, you know.
From the Quatermass one, this first album, there is a song called "Black Sheep of the Family." Yeah. As you probably know, Richie recorded this with Rainbow.
Well, that was written by the guitar player who worked with me with Marsha Hunt.
Yeah,
like Steve Hammond, Canadian guy. Yeah, and he wrote that song. Sadly, he's not around any longer. He was a nice player. Problems I've just written on my website about the Marsha Hunt time. You know, it wasn't that great. It was fun. She was nice to work for, but there didn't seem to be much musical direction, or you know, because she became such a great photographic model, and she was a success in hair, you know, and she had that massive big hairstyle, big afro. I don't know what had happened if she hadn't got pregnant. She just came in one day and said, "I'm folding the band up. That's it, boys." I said, "Oh, why is that, Marsha?" She said, "I'm expecting Mick Jagger's baby." You know, so I said, "Oh, well, good excuse as any." She gave us all some money. It was very nice, and that was the end of it. Never saw her again. She was a nice girl, Marsha. Very nice.
Bass parts for the song of Warhorse, Red Sea, is, as far as I know, based on Hush, yeah?
Yeah, you're dead right. Yeah.
Yeah?
It was based on Hush. But I've always liked that. I've always liked that rhythm. I just love it. And I remember one of my favourite bass players with the Vanilla Fudge, Timmy Bogart. He said to me once, he said, "That is the best bass riff in the world," he said. And I was so chuffed with it, and I thought, yeah, I do like it. What can I do that's not Hush, you know? So started messing around, and of course Pete Parks came up with the rest of it. Red Sea, and that was very good for the guy that was engineering our album. It was a guy called David Stock, and I think the Red Sea track might have been one of the first ones we were laying down. And a man was visiting the studio, for a Canadian guy, and he said, "My God," he said, "who's engineered that track?" He heard it playing, and David Stock said, "Oh, I'm the engineer. It's me." He said, "You want to come and work with me for me in Canada?" He made him an offer. He went off to Canada and never came back. He was very grateful for Warhorse for getting a great job, you know. But yeah, it was based on Hush, no doubt about it.
Yeah, according to, in Warhorse also there was another drummer, who was called Barney James. Yeah, he played also with Wakeman, Dusty
yeah,
Springfield, BJ Robbie, and he was actor also. Yeah, so
yeah.
can you tell something more about him?
Yeah, well, Mac was playing with a lot of different people, and because we had a period where there weren't many gigs for us. Our record company, we were fighting with the record company. There wasn't a lot going on for us at the time. It was a bit of a barren period. So Mac started taking gigs with other bands, and he went off to France with a band called Gong.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, we got some Warhorse shows come up, and Mac had to choose between staying in France or coming back with us. And he decided to stay in France. So we thought we need a drummer quick. So there was an advert in the Melody Maker, and there was this guy, Barney James. And he came along, and we liked him, he liked us. And he was with us after that. He was only on 5 tracks, 5 demos we made. So we never actually made any singles with Barney as such. But yeah, he was a great drummer. He was very different to Mac. And he was more, he kind of had a bit of funk about him, you know. He kind of changed the music, made it a little bit funky. During the time with Barney, we actually did record a whole set live on tape, which Pete Parks has got, but people have been asking about it for years, and sadly the quality was just so poor we couldn't use it. There was no way to clean it up. But yeah, Barney was great. And of course Rick Wakeman came along after all those years, and you know, we were still in touch with him. We were still kind of friends, you know, and he was doing pretty good. And he said, I got this concept thing, album I'm doing, and I think it was Knights of the Round Table. And he said, could I borrow Barney James and Ashley Holt for the album? So we said, well, yeah, of course you can. They can do what they like. So our manager even let them use our PAs. We had a massive PA system. He let Rick use everything that he needed, our rehearsal room as well. And they rehearsed this thing. And he actually put it on at Wembley on ice. They did it on ice. Can you imagine that? All these horses on ice, false horses on ice skates. That was quite spectacular. Anyway, it was a big success. And we were still fighting to get a record deal. And finally, because we'd had a lot of problems, Dave D, there was a guy called Dave D. Do you remember Dave D, Dozy, Beaky, Mick and Titch?
Yes, I know this band.
Big hit band. They had more number ones than the Beatles. But Dave D, the singer, he became an A&R man, and he loved Warhorse. He wanted to sign us up, but his bosses said, well, we don't need another rock band. You got too many rock bands. So that never came off. And then we bumped into a producer called Larry Yaskill, who was a top producer for Warner Brothers. He came along, listened to the band. He said, amazing, I love it, he said. He went out the door. He said, I'll be back in 5 minutes. He came back with a couple of bottles of champagne, poured it all out for us. We shook hands on a deal with Warner Brothers, drank the champagne. The very next day, headlines in all the newspapers around the world, Arab oil embargo. And it said, there'd be no more vinyl records. You know, everybody got paranoid with fear that they couldn't make any more records because they needed oil to create the vinyl. And apparently the Arab embargo was going to stop all the people that needed oil getting it. So immediately all the record companies said, don't sign any more acts. So we can't produce the records. So that was the end of that one. So we thought, you can't get any worse than this. And then finally, there was a subsidiary of Tamla Motown, which Tamla Motown is not known for rock and roll really, but the subsidiary were interested in signing Warhorse. And we had our album already written, more or less. So we called a meeting at the manager's house, and I said, well, we've finally got a deal, boys. We've finally, after all this struggle, we've got a deal. And Ashley turned around and he said, well, me and Barney are leaving, just like that. So, of course, my jaw at the ground. I said, "You're leaving?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "We're joining Rick's band." And he said, "Rick's offered us a tour of America and, so much money a year and all this." So I said, "Well, okay." When I got over the shock, I said, "Well, good luck, go and do what's good for you." I said, "But there's no reason we couldn't still make this album, but they all said, no, that's it. Warhorse is over, dead and gone, I think it was less than 6 months later when I bumped into Ashley. He said we were too hasty. We shouldn't have shut Warhorse up, like that. But that was it. And Barney became a jazz drummer, more or less. We did get back together with Barney. It was me, Pete Parks, and Frank Wilson. Barney asked us if he would back him on a solo album, which someone was financing for him, and he was going to sing.
Mm-hmm.
And he did the singing. Him and Frank Wilson wrote the songs. And the company, the guy that financed him, was forming a record company, and he wanted me to be the sort of head of A&R. So he said, "I'm going to make half an album, and then I want you to sell it. And then whoever finances us will make the other half." So I said, "Okay, whatever you want to do." So we did this Barney James album, and that's where we met Ron Penny from Fandango, because he was the drummer on the session. And anyway, I took the thing around the record companies, and nobody wanted to know. And the trouble was, it was a concept thing based on Vikings and Viking ships. And a guy from the Soft Machine had just done a similar thing called Leaf and the Longships. Or Soft Machine, or it might have been Hawkwind. No, it's from Hawkwind. Guy from Hawkwind, I forget his name. So he'd been selling out this album, was doing well, Leaf and the Longships. So that kind of put Barney's effort in the shade. And then Barney, he sadly died. And he died now about 10 years ago, yeah. And it finally came out. The album, the CD is available now of his half of the record. It credits him as the drummer as well, which is wrong. It was Ron Penny, but his family probably didn't realise that he didn't play drums as well. But yeah, he was great, old Barney. But all I heard was that he drifted into playing with jazz, and got out of rock and roll completely. So, yeah.
This called this album is called James Barney and Warhorse. Connect second coming, yeah. The second
one, yeah. It's not bad. We had a session guitar American player on it, Mark Warner, phenomenal guitar player, yeah. But they didn't mention Ron Penny, sadly. But then the people behind it didn't talk to me before it was done. They didn't know. They thought they assumed it was Barney playing the drums.
I think Peter Parks, as guitarist, had the longest in your career with this. From the guitarists that you work with during your career, Peter Parks is the guy who you work with longer than others. I think you are a soulmate, and you have similar musical, you are together, with him. You connected musically very, very well, yeah. I think he's your soulmate, and you worked with him for few bands, with Warhorse, with Fandango, Good Old Boys, Terry Marshall also, yeah.
Yeah. Well, when Pete joined, we kind of hit it off straight away. And although it was everything was co-written, me and him came up with quite a few ideas together, and we seemed to sort of hit it off. When Warhorse folded up, he stayed with me. I'd been offered this to take over a situation which went under the name of Dynamite, and I asked Pete if he wanted to join in that with me, and he said he did. We made a recording which didn't do a lot. In fact, we made a new version of St. Louis, which was the Warhorse single, and it was damn good. It was a turntable hit, places like Italy and that. But we were offered a tour of Italy, but we never did it. And that kind of morphed into Fandango. It kind of went back from the other musicians to just me and Pete. And then we said, what about Ron Penny, the guy with Barney? And we asked him if he wanted to do something new. And then somebody told us about this great singer called Jim Proops. And we asked him and he said, yeah. And that was it. That was a difficult time because we made some demos and we had meetings with just about every record company in London. And punk was the thing then. They hated us. They hated what we were doing with Fandango. And I remember meeting a guy at one record company. He was quite a young guy and he was the head of A&R. And he said, I used to go and watch Warhorse at the Marquee. He said, I was always down the front. What a great band, you know. And I thought, we're well in with this guy. And in the next breath, he says to me, what's an old guy like you still doing in the business? I was about 30 years old. So that's what we were up against. And as luck would have it, as we walked out of this record company, we bumped into a guy who'd been an agent for Warhorse and called Matthew Stumpf. I don't know how you pronounce that really. I think that's a Polish name. Stumpf or something like that. Matthew Stumpf, I think his name was. Anyway, he said, I haven't seen you for years. How's it going? And we said, well, everybody's telling us what we've done is rubbish. And he said, I know these guys have started a new label in Germany. He said that would probably love what you're doing. And we met up with them and that was Shark Records. So that's how we got to make the 2 Fandango albums. They just loved it. We went over to Germany. It was fabulous and made it all there.
Yeah, then it was Good Old Boys. Yeah, after that, I think. Yeah, after the Fandango, you formed the Good Old Boys. Yes.
Well, there was a guy called Frankie Reed who was a great singer. He'd never been a professional, but everybody knew him and everybody liked him. And a couple of times a year, he'd get all the best musicians he could, all the real top guys together in a venue and just play old rock and roll and stuff. And one day he asked Carlo, and Carlo had sold his drum kit. He said, how can I do that? He said, I haven't got any drums. He said, well, can you borrow some? He said, it's not for a week. So Carlo said, I went round to Ginger Baker's, who lived a few doors away from him, and he said, can I borrow a drum kit? And Ginger said, I haven't got a full kit here. He said, I can lend you probably half a kit. So he said, I'll take that. So he thought, who else do I know? Then he went round to Mitch Mitchell's house. He said, can you lend us half a kit to make up a whole kit? So he had half a Ginger's and half a Mitch Mitchell's. And he hadn't played for about 2 years. And he went along with Frank and he did this big night. There was loads of different musicians there. And he said, it was great. He said, I want to do some work with Frank. He said, is that good? You know, I want to do it some more. So they started playing together. And they asked me first, and I said, I ain't got the time. I don't want to do that, you know. So they got another quite well-known bass player, but they didn't like him, and they wanted me to do it. And they got Pete Parks, and so they said, well, just help us out. Like back in the Billy Davis days, Carlo said, can you just help us out on a couple of gigs? I said, yeah, okay. Well, it was just so much fun and it was so good. I said, yeah, I want to do this. And we ended up doing it. That was 1979. And the band eventually, I left about 4 years ago. Yeah, we had a hell of a run, nearly 40 years together. And loads of different people passed through the Good Old Boys. Carlo had he'd done his thing with Artwood, and he started to gig again as the Carlo Little All Stars, and so that was myself, a guy called Garrett Watkins on keyboards, who used to be with Mark Knopfler, great keyboard player, Garrett Watkins, and who else was it? And a great guitar player called Alex Chandler, and we played a couple of gigs at the Eel Pie Club, and people loved it. They all turned up to see Carlo, and it was great. And then Carlo sadly contracted lung cancer. And, he only lived for a couple more years, which was sad. And then when Carlo knew he didn't have very long, he'd moved up to Newcastle, near Newcastle, where his wife was from, to get her back into territory she was more familiar with, where her family were. He bought a nice house up there with a swimming pool. You know, he'd done really well, and he recorded his solo album. And anyway, when he knew he was really ill, seriously ill, he booked this venue and said, would the good old boys come up and we do one last gig, you know, for the hell of it? And so we did, and all the people turned out to see him. It was lovely. Yeah, he was the greatest, Carlo. He really was. But yeah, I mean, different people went through the good old boys. We had an amazing guitarist called Simon Bishop, who sadly died just about a year ago. A phenomenal player, much in the Albert Lee sort of mould, and Pete Parks being sort of hard rock, but they put the two together. It really was good. We had the drummer from the Strawbs, Richard Hudson. He'd had hit records with the Strawbs and Hudson Ford. So it was a little bit of a super group, you know. It was good fun, but it was purely for fun. And everybody said afterwards, "Oh, we should have." I mean, we did make a live album. It was the 40th. Would it be the 40th Deep Purple anniversary? It was the 40th, or would it have been the 50th? 40th. Well, I think it was the 40th Deep Purple anniversary. A guy called Jerry Bloom put it on in a town called Bedford. And the good old boys played, and also who was the last bass player? What was his name? With Purple.
With Deep Purple last. I mean, they're not. Who's playing now? Yeah,
No,
Roger.
the last one. The last, not Roger, the other guy. What was his name?
Glenn Hughes.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, he came and did a little solo spot as well, and we sort of shook hands and did a little interview, and he said, "Congratulations." Of course, he turned American, you know. "Congratulations, Nick." He said, "I'm being the first bass player, you know." So I said, "Oh, congratulations on being the last," you know. And they put it on YouTube and said, "Historic meeting," you know, as if we were a couple of politicians. Oh, very funny. Yeah, Glenn, yeah, he's a nice guy, Glenn. Yeah, he knows his way around a bass too. He's pretty good.
I'd like to ask also about Screaming Lord Sutch, because, okay, to be honest with you, he wasn't a good singer, but he has this magical something within himself, that he gathered a lot of very good players, you know, professional, like Jimmy Page, like you, like Noel Redding, like how he did it.
Well, it was kind of accidental, first of all, because you go back to 1960, maybe even late 1959. Carlo started playing a little band, and he'd been in the army. He'd learned to play drums in the army, and because we had conscription, then everybody had to go in the army for 2 years, and Carlo had learned to play drums, so he wanted to join a band. And it was a case of, oh, this guy plays guitar, Ricky Brown, he knows how to play a bit of bass, Nicky Hopkins can play piano, and they got together, and they had a different guy singing, and Dave Sutch was just a local guy. I mean, he worked as a plumber, and he was a local guy that used to hang out with them, and he was almost like their roadie, you know. He'd sort of carry the kit in with them, and every so often he'd get on stage and leap about, and people used to like him. And eventually he became the singer, though he couldn't sing. But he was obsessed with sort of horror stuff, and people like Screaming Jay Hawkins, and he built up the imagery. It was colossal, and very quickly they morphed into this amazing act. I think it was kind of 50-50. The success of it was the band itself couldn't get better than that. This guy Bernie Watson, I mean, he would have been up there with all the big names today. You know, Bernie Watson and Nicky Hopkins, Carlo and Ricky Brown. They were the best you could get. And everybody else was playing pop stuff. We were all playing like Cliff Richard and the Shadows. Nothing wrong with that, but it was pretty tame compared with what Lord Sutch, he was doing all old R&B numbers that we never even heard of. Stuff from the States, you know, Oop Oopadoo and all this and things. Nobody had ever heard these songs. And of course, he had Chuck Berry as well. We didn't know Chuck Berry very well back in 1960. So he kind of picked a repertoire that he could just manage to sing. And he did that for the next 100 years. That was incredible. But he had the act. He was very physically fit, and he'd dress up in all his amazing outfits. And Carlo came up with lots of the ideas. I mean, you never knew what was going to happen at a Screaming Lord Sutch gig. And I mean, very quickly, he became the biggest act probably in England. He could play anywhere in England and fill anywhere, fill it up, capacity crowd, top money. He made a fortune. And of course, the band became the Savages with just his backing group. Dave took most of the money. He became the big name, and he was very good at getting press. They went to Scotland, and there was a lot of friction with the crowd, and it ended up in a fight. And Dave Sutch hit two guys with a mic stand, and they were carried off to hospital, and Dave was thrown in jail, and it was all over the newspapers in England. You know, it was big news. There was always stuff happening like that. And if he was going along the road once and a stone broke the windscreen of his car, and immediately it was put in the papers like Lord Sutch attacked by a mystery sniper, as if someone had shot at his car. It was just a stone broke the windscreen. He was really clued up like that. But of course, half of it was to go and see him because he never knew what he was going to do. And I remember one of the first shows I saw, he did his Great Balls of Fire act, and he used to have a tin of petrol at the front of the stage, an old newspaper. He would set a light to it, and there'd be a massive, great gush of flame. And then he would come out with a fireman's helmet on, ringing a bell with a bucket of water. And he started throwing the water everywhere to put the fire out. And as it happened, the keyboard player put up an umbrella. And the spike of this umbrella hit Dave right between the eyes. He fell off the stage bleeding. They carried him off on a stretcher to an ambulance, you know. And the promoter said, give Lord Sutch a big hand. They carried him out unconscious. Everybody's clapping. You never knew what was going to happen. And another show I saw, which was amazing, the curtains opened and the Savages are playing really loud and hairy and dirty, you know. And there's a big box with a cover over it. And somebody says, "Where's Lord Sutch? Where's Lord Sutch?" They're all looking. And then somebody rips the cover off, and this thing is a big cage, and Sutch is inside it in a leopard skin coat thing, like shaking the bars. And next thing, when it comes to the guitar solo, he rips the bars open and leaps into the crowd, and all the girls start running, terrified. I mean, I took my girlfriend, now my wife, I often tell this story. I took my girlfriend to see, I said, "Do you want to come and see Screaming Lord Sutch?" And she said, yeah. She brought two friends along. By the second song, they were so terrified, they had to leave. I had to take them home. And I thought, well, it's just an act. It's not real. Because he came up with a big giant axe and he was chasing people. It was total insanity. And then he developed his Jack the Ripper act. Yeah. And he would get the roadie to dress up as a woman, and he would chase him around the stage, and then he'd pull out his big knife, and Richie would make the ripping sound down his E string, you know, as he sort of makes out he's cutting this guy open, and he'd pull out big rubber heart and lungs. It was just crazy, you know. It was funny. And he had skeletons and stuff. The top of his van, he had a big alligator on the top, big giant full-size alligator, and a set of bull horns on the front. And it was just spectacular, you know. It was a real spectacle.
Yeah,
But he got his reputation amongst musicians, like go and see Screaming Lord Sutch and the Savages, because they've always got good guys in the band.
Mhm.
And when he went wrong was when he started to get cheaper guys, because he didn't want to pay the best guys. He started to get guys that just weren't very good, and the act suffered because of it. And I think that was when his downfall really started. And he ended up going to America. He bought himself a Rolls Royce, and he had it sprayed up like a Union Jack. And he went off to America, and he had a big portrait of the Queen in the back. And he was advertising Marshall amplifiers, which were brand new then. Jim Marshall just started to make them. And they loved him on all the chat shows because he used to call himself the 5th Earl of Harrow. There was no such thing existed, but people thought he was a real earl, you know, which is like the next thing, royalty, you know. He'd be on the chat shows in America saying how he regularly had tea with the Queen and Prince Philip, and they believed all that stuff. But when we went over to America in '68, because we saw him again, and he was trying to get a record deal, and I introduced him to Tetragrammaton, and they didn't want to know. And anyway, he managed to get himself a deal, and somehow, I don't know how he did it, but he persuaded, I think it's Jimmy Page, John Bonham, and Noel Redding to sort of have a jam with him in the studio, and he recorded it. I don't think most of them even knew they were being recorded. And he brought it out as an album called Lord Sutch and Heavy Friends. And it got in the charts, actually got in the charts. I mean, it was just total rubbish, really. But on the strength of those names. So anyway, when he came to do a second one, it kind of restored his career a bit. And he asked me and Carlo if we'd sort of work with him again. And he wasn't paying much money, but we said we want more money. We want like 4 times what you pay the other guys if we do it. And he agreed. So we started to work with him again, and he wanted to do another Heavy Friends album. Anyway, he did the Heavy Friends album. I felt really ill that day. I had the flu, and I felt terrible, and I really didn't want to do it. And he told me originally that Richie was going to play on it, and I said, "Well, I don't want to appear on a stage with Richie anyway." I said, "Why don't you get Albert Lee?" I said, "He's better than Richie, you know." So Sutch, to get me there, he said, "Oh, I've got Albert Lee. Albert Lee's going to do it." And I thought, as bad as I feel, as ill as I feel, I got to play with Albert, you know. So when I turned up, there's Richie on the stage. Oh, I was pretty annoyed at that. So anyway, we did it. It wasn't very. I was terrible. I mean, I couldn't play a note right. I was all over the place. I didn't feel at all well. And Keith Moon got up, and he was totally drunk, and he got him up to do a drum solo, and it was just a shambles. It was a hell of a mess. Anyway, when we heard the tapes back, some of it was quite good. Carlo had the original tapes, but what Dave did, he remixed it. He took other people in the studio and he put them on, and they weren't even there. He got who did he get? I know he got Victor Brox's wife on it because she'd been in Jesus Christ Superstar. He put Matthew Fisher, although Math wasn't there, and you know, just to put names on the album. And I happened to find out through the Musicians Union that he hadn't paid us enough money, because apparently he should have paid us a lot more. He was paying us to do the gig, but he should have paid us a lot more to record it. And so Carlo said, "Oh, call Dave up and tell him we want some more money. He owes us some more money." So I called him up, and I said, "You owe us more money, Dave." I said, "You know, you're not paying us Musicians Union rates. We're both in the union." And he got really annoyed about it. And he said, "Well," he said, "if you want me to give you more money," he said, "I'm not going to put your name on the album." So I said, "All right, don't put our names on the album." So that's why we're not on the front. Me and Carla in little tiny print on the back. And we never got any more money anyway. Yeah. but he was a great friend, and we did love him dearly. I played with him on and off most of his life, and it was always great fun. You know, it was always a good laugh, especially when he was running for Parliament. You know, he'd play in a town when there was an election on. He'd always draw bigger crowds, and he was a great character and eccentric, and he was just a lovely man. I mean, when you were with him, he would tell you jokes, and you just laugh non-stop all the time. As you say, he couldn't really sing, but he made a great career out of that, and he was great. I was very sorry when he died. You know, it was terrible. I was with him about 2 days before he committed suicide. You know, it was a dreadful shock. Yeah.
There is some project that is called Blagards and Cowboys. Yeah. Can you tell something more about this project? Because I even don't know which date when it was recorded and when you created this project. Yeah.
It's a long time ago now. I can't remember the dates. I got a friend called Johnny Kerrison. You might have heard of his name. He was in a group with Gillan and Glover called Episode 6.
Yeah.
And he had a terrible accident when he was 21 years old. He broke his back, and he's been in a wheelchair ever since. Anyway, he was a terrific drummer, and although he couldn't use his legs, we used to get him up with the good old boys just to do what he could on the kit, and he was always bloody good then. Anyway, he found a man who invented an electronic bass drum for him, which he played with his mouth. So he used to wear a harness, like a harmonica harness, with this little tube, and when he blew it, the bass drum would sound through his amp. You wouldn't know the difference. It was incredible. It was like, he was reborn then, and he formed several different bands and did quite a lot of work. But he met this fellow who was quite a talented writer who lived down in the West Country, and he said he was going to do some recording with him, and would I do it, and would Pete do it? So it was just a case of an old friend's favour, really. You know, we went to a little studio, and we were told what to play, and we just played it, and that was it. And I think John probably paid himself to get it released. It wasn't sort of what I'm used to doing, but I think the quality of it was okay. You know, the songs are okay. It's I'd forgotten all about it. It was a long time ago. I don't think John's done anything like that for 7 or 8 years, I would think, at least. But yeah, a few collectors brought him along to be signed at gigs. So yeah, but he was a lovely drummer, John. You know, and in the end, I mean, he's a few years younger than me, but I think he's stopped playing now. And but it was good for him, and he got up there and did it. Nobody thought he could, you know. And you think when you're paralysed from the waist down, there's no future in music, but he proved otherwise. He did it, and it was a fabulous thing to do.